to introduce our presenter. We have Sean Weaver today, who's going to be sharing his wonderful photography with us. Sean is also a talented musician, and he's a good friend. So I hope that you will enjoy his presentation. I know you will, and take it, Sean.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction, Julie. As you all know, this is my presentation, Photographic Journeys, Northern New Mexico by Motorcycle. And this started off this year. Usually I take some time and jump on the bike and take a week off and just kind of go wherever I'm aimed. Obviously this year with things shutting down, travel being restricted, I did a lot of day trips around New Mexico and just kind of re-explored the state, found areas that I haven't been to before, rediscovered areas that it's been a while, and packed the camera with me, and hopefully I took some photos that everyone on the call will enjoy. And I know, Julie, you said that everybody's muted. I would like to say if anybody has questions as we go or comments, if they'd like to chime in, there'll certainly be time at the end. I hope we can have a short conversation on photography, road trips, anything that involves a journey. So with that being said, I'd like to take everyone to where this project in particular began. A lot of you might recognize this. This is the chapel in Golden, New Mexico, between Madrid and Sandia Park, just right off Highway 14. And when I was putting this presentation together, it hit me that when I was in high school, taking a photography class a few years ago, this was actually, I took another picture of this church, and it was the first photograph that I ever sold. And going back through this and thinking when Corey, my wife, and I were taking a long meandering route down to the Salinas Pueblo missions east of Albuquerque, we drove by and pulled into the parking lot and pulled the camera out and took a couple photos. And I thought, talk about kind of a journey that circles back around, and just kind of thinking where I started, and then this summer redeveloping my love for photography and my passion that started so many years ago. Before I get started with the photos, I thought everybody might be interested to see some influences that I've had with this particular project and my photography in general. When I went to art school back in the early 90s in Denver and knew several artists living in the city at the time. The gentleman at the top left is Richard Vincent, who's a New York artist who moved to Denver and was really well known for his geometric paintings. He was always inspired by what the landscape looks like when you see it from the air, from an airplane. And as you can see by his two works, very, very heavily geometric, and relied heavily on shapes to convey a message. The green painting, the green work to the right of the screen is from a longtime friend of mine, an artist named Roland Bernier, who I used to work for a short while as his studio assistant. And Roland really has had fun playing with words and how they're shaped. The words didn't really mean anything, but just how they look on a piece. And sadly, both Richard and Roland have passed away, but they still continue to strongly influence how I see things. And then there's a really good book I read a number of years ago by Eddie Harris called South of Haunted Dreams. And Eddie jumped on a motorcycle. He's from the north and explored the deep south on a motorcycle as a black man and exploring what his relationship to the South was. And there's a lot of literary motorcycle journey genres. I think probably one of the most recent popular ones is Chasing Che. But I thought a lot about this book when I was out on the motorcycle, because when we pursue something creative, it's more than just a final product. When I was in art school, one of my professors said that every time we hit the shutter, it's that single split second is a culmination of our life experience. And as we're traveling around the state and looking at the landscape, we can't divorce the landscape from our experience, and we can't divorce it from the fact that I'm riding through ancestral lands. I'm riding through Hispanic settlements, through cattle country. That when you're off exploring a state like New Mexico, there's really so many cultural variables, and you really have to go into it with a high degree of respect. I think photographing the landscape is like photographing a person, and trying to draw that personality out of a place. And like Eddie Harris, I kind of question where I stand in this. As you'll see in the photos, there's a continuation of history. Uh, you know, a lot of the places I photographed are abandoned, dissolving, and it really made me wonder that when you look at an abandoned building or something like that, the impact that that made on the landscape, the fact that that building represented somebody's dream. It was a business that they thought about pursuing, that supported a family, and now it's left to the environment. And I think a lot of times as humans, we're very impatient, and we leave these scars on the landscape, and the landscape is very patient in taking over again. So with that background, I'll go into some of the photos that I got this year. The first part of this presentation is revisiting. These photos are from places that I've tried to go before this summer, and tried to get some photos and came back. I wasn't happy with the photos. And this time with a different perspective, I went back and just to see what I could get and come at it with a different viewpoint. The first set is obviously Lamy, New Mexico, the train station. I think before this summer, I was here probably about 3 or 4 times. And every time I got home and looked at the photos, I just wasn't impressed with it. And this time really slowing down and spending time with the station and just getting a deeper sense of it and not being in a rush. I was really happy with what I got back. And on the right hand side, the photo of the freight door, you can see where in my previous slide with Richard Vincent's work, where that real heavy geometric influence comes in. I think you'll see that through a lot of these photos. And then this, as many people know, is the Cueva, right between Las Vegas and Madrid. And again, going up to that mill, excuse me. I've been up there several times. I've stopped with the camera and walked around and just slowing down. I think this last summer has taught us that we have to look at things differently. Things aren't going to be the same, and how we react to what we're calling the new normal can be beneficial. Not to discount what's happening in the country right now and the people who've lost their lives because of COVID. But sometimes it just takes shaking things up to get a new perspective and come at something differently. And the one on the right was just, when that flower was in full bloom against that beautiful textured adobe wall. That's actually one of my favorite ones. I've made a print of that, and it kind of brought me back to when I was in art school and looking at somebody's work with all these just beautiful tones to it. And I'll be honest, I kind of choked back tears because I thought there's a journey there that for me to create something like that was really meaningful. And then Mora, I've been through Mora quite a bit, especially the mill on the right, and again, taking some time, not being in a hurry, and stopping. And like the barn on the left, when you see those of us who drive through Mora fairly frequently, you see that barn off to the side of the highway. And this is the first time that I thought I'd stop and take a photo of it and spend quite a bit of time just absorbing how it felt. There was this great storm moving through, and I was really grateful that I stopped for a change. And Canyoncito was probably one of the most frustrating places that I've been to before. Many of you will recognize that as the little chapel off to the side of I-25 as you're going through Canyoncito to Santa Fe. When I've been there before, usually it's been on the way to or from Santa Fe, and I will stop for a few minutes and try to get a couple pictures and come back home, and it was just kind of dull. And one afternoon, I rode down there for the sole intent of seeing what kind of photos I can get. I spent a couple hours walking around the chapel. There's obviously the small cemetery there, and again, just kind of getting a sense of place and walking through the cemetery and thinking again that these are people who came before us, who had lives, who had dreams, and how many of us just keep driving by on our way to and from Santa Fe and without thinking about that, and taking the time and kind of looking at the headstones and the chapel and getting a real sense of place. I came back with what I hope again are photos that everybody enjoys. This is a little gas station. It's funny, on a motorcycle, part of the reason that I like taking the photos on a motorcycle is you really feel like you're part of your surroundings. When the temperature changes, you immediately know you're hot, you're cold, it's windy, it's not windy, and you're not isolated away from the outside like you are in a car. And I don't know how many times I've driven by this little gas station, and I have an earlier photo of the Texaco sign that used to be by the highway, and I never saw this little gas station. And it wasn't until I rode a motorcycle past that I realized there's a gas station there. And the nice thing about being on a motorcycle too, as opposed to a car, is if you have to pull off to the side of the road, it's a lot easier to do it in a much smaller vehicle than trying to pull a car off and find a place for that. But and again, I got off and took a look around and fell in love with this little teeny gas station. So, like I said, part of this journey was either finding new places, being surprised by a new place, or maybe going back to a place that I sped past and didn't give a second look, and rediscovering a lot of the places around northern New Mexico that I find really just stunning. And this one is a kind of a good example. This is on Highway 94 between Mora and Sapio when you go through the backside. And this was one of the photo trips that I just jogged out one evening, and I was getting frustrated because everywhere I went with the camera, I was getting photos that I kind of knew in the back of my mind that, they weren't going to be my favorites. And I think this photo was just waiting for me, because when I rode by, the sun was setting, the light felt right. It really just brought out the texture of the grass and the richness of the stones. And I couldn't have picked or found a better time to photograph this. And I think one of the things as I get older and I carry the camera around a little more is I realize that patience is really lends itself to the right photograph. I think when I was younger, I was in this kind of drive to get the perfect photograph, and sometimes I wasn't willing to wait. And in this case, just having the fortuitous going by at the right moment and spending some time exploring that area. A lot of times on this trip with technology the way it is, it's kind of nice with Google Maps. Before I go somewhere, I can actually drop the little man down on the map and kind of quickly explore and see, am I going to be riding to a place that still exists or riding to a place that has a name on a map and is nothing when you get there. And this was actually kind of a funny trip because on the motorcycle, I don't have the GPS and have to remember kind of the highway numbers from a map. And I think I got lost about 3 times going out to this church. It's in, I think it's a town called El Ranchito, between Santa Fe and Los Alamos. And I was just getting so frustrated because I'd try to find it, the light would turn. I'd head back home with my head held low because I didn't come back with anything. And when I finally got there, again, I was really fortunate because the sky just had these beautiful nighttime clouds that were forming overhead. And like I said, too, if anybody has any questions, comments as we go, feel free to interrupt. This is in a little town called Folsom. It's north of the Capilene volcano monument, a little bit east of Raton, northeast of Raton. And this used to be a big railroad stop. And this Folsom Motel it's just right off the side of the highway as you come into the town. And it looks like a little plaza hotel. The front is just this great old west hotel, uh, and, but it's just quiet. And you walk around the town, and there's the only thing you really hear is the occasional car or truck going by the highway. And I guess there's a lot of turkeys that live next door to the Folsom Hotel, so I got them all excited, and they told me that they were kind of irritated with me just interrupting their day. But it's really interesting when you go through these places, and like I said, you kind of get a sense of where we stand now with our shared past, and walking around, not hearing anything, and thinking, what was a Saturday night like here? This is a railroad town, people coming and going, and you imagine a hotel like this with a bar and on the main street, that there was probably just all this noise and carrying on that just doesn't exist anymore. And I think taking a photo of that, I kind of feel like there's a sadness in these photos because it's something that probably a lot of people had memories, good, bad, whatever, of this place, and now the memories are just kind of blown away with the wind. And the windmill on the right was just something that I almost tripped over walking around the hotel, and immediately I just loved the texture between the hard metal and the grass. And I was really happy that I almost tripped over it and didn't trip over it. This was actually one that I'll admit I was not on the motorcycle for, but this is kind of one of those crazy things. My wife Corey can attest to the fact that sometimes if I'm driving and I see something that I have a hunch will be off to the side of the road or something, I've been known to slam the brakes on and kind of follow the road. I try not to do it so much with her in the car now, but if I'm by myself, I will do. And this was just a little dirt road. This is on the highway between Trementilla and Mosquero. if you go out of Las Vegas towards K-Fun and just keep following that road. This was another one of those drives where I was just getting really frustrated, wasn't really finding something, felt like I was wasting gas to come back with nothing. And saw this little turnoff, and it had the sign of a town name that I forget what it is. So kind of slammed on the brakes and did a U-turn and followed this road probably for about 20 minutes. And there was just nothing. It was this dirt road that was going back into some ranches, and uh, something just kept telling me that, just try to go a little bit further. And the sun was setting. I was really losing some good light, and came down over this hill and saw this little chapel in this valley that was completely unexpected. But I was so glad that I followed my hunch to find out what was there, and came back pretty happy. And this is right outside of town. This is in Bernal. Again, I think how many times those of us who live in Vegas go back and forth between Santa Fe, and we see all the exits along the way. And as we're in a hurry, we're going to a meeting, we're running errands or whatever. We just never take the time to pull off the highway and take a look what's in these little towns. And this little chapel, the image on the right, just the grave marker and the stone on the church. The textures I was immediately drawn to, and the church on the side. I'm a big fan of New Mexico churches. I think a lot of us are. And there was a former editor at the Optic. We were talking about what's the draw about New Mexico churches, and I think he summed it up really best. Martin Salazar, if anybody remembers him. And that these are places where it's a symbol of community, and it's a symbol of where our life stages happen, our births, our weddings, when our loved ones pass away. And there's really something simple about New Mexico churches, a lot of these small town churches, but when you think about what they mean to the community, and what they mean to individual people and families, I think it's really special. And just, again, spending some time with them and not kind of drifting in, taking a quick look, and riding off. You really get a sense of these communities, I think, through these churches. This is in San Isidro. The thing that really just amazed me with these churches were the lace curtains inside the church. Walking by and looking at those, whoever made those was a real artist, and just how they contrast with the adobe wall. And that really, the photograph on the left is actually one of my favorite photos, again, from this series. This is another one of those where I thought I was coming home empty-handed. I went down to Cerrillos. There's that church in Cerrillos between Santa Fe and Madrid. And I don't know how many times I've driven by that and I think, oh, I should have had my camera. Because when you come into town, the church is just kind of ensconced in these trees and the mountains behind it. And so I rode down, and specifically to get a photo of that church, and the sky was just horribly wrong. The sun was too bright. It was just one of those trips where nothing seemed to be going right. And instead of taking the quickest way home, I went through Galisteo. And I've been through Galisteo a few times, but when you're on a motorcycle, I think you're just aware more of your surroundings, and came across this cemetery off to the side of the road on the way into town. And there was something that just about that lone cross on the cemetery wall that really stuck out for me. This is a little town, Duran. It's if you go to Vaughan, it's a little bit south of Vaughan on, I think, Highway 54. Duran was a railroad transfer point where the railroad would you'd switch engines before the railroad continued on their journey. Um, I think the town of Duran was actually named after family members who settled there who actually worked for the Santa Fe Railroad back in the day. And this is actually, if you remember, one of my first slides with Roland Bernier and his word art. A lot of the photos I intrigued just like he is, just as words as form and not necessarily as meaning. And the boxcar, the Southwest Chief boxcar on the left, uh, I just love that old font. I've done some graphic design, so I'm kind of a font nerd. And the one on the right is when we were there, kind of walking around, and you saw this building, and obviously it was a stop where tourists, would come in and shop, buy trinkets, whatever. And now it was just this shell, quiet on the end of the highway. And I thought, how many people have traveled through there in its day and stopped, and they were on their own journey. And now again, it's just these kind of whispers of the past that are fading into history. Nature's taking over. This one, again, was a photo that I didn't set out to get, but on the way home from taking another photo, I was up in Chimayo, trying to get a photo of the sanctuary there, and took kind of a long winding route back.